There we go.
That always shocks me.
Nice. Awesome. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Charlie Munford, and this is Agential Topics, sponsored in part by the Agential Biology Institute, which is an institute dedicated to building a physical model of biological agency. We so far are still searching for what biological agency is. So we have these meetings in part to come up with better theories, better testable empirical ideas about agency. And today, our special guest is Andrea Hiott, and she's here to talk about bodies as care collectives. We're going to talk about the question, what is the body? And without much more, I'm just going to let Andrea take it from there.
All right. Hey, everybody. Is it okay to share the screen? Am I allowed?
Yeah, I should, I
Okay.
should, I think I've just given you permission. Test it out.
Did that work?
Uh, Not yet. Let's see. Something's happening.
No? Yes?
No, not yet. Let's see. Okay, try it now. No,
No? Yes? No?
not yet.
I don't see
No.
anything. Let me just maybe I should just restart and come back. I'm sorry, or what do you think?
Okay.
Because it
Um.
says it's doing it and I see it, but
Oh, really?
yeah, but I'll just come right back and
Okay.
or I'll try one more time, but
Try one more time because usually this works. It's worked before.
okay. I tried.
Uh, no, we
No.
don't. No, it didn't
Okay.
come up. Okay, maybe just start over. Sorry, guys. Yeah, we had a great paper from her to read over. I enjoyed it quite a lot. Not not really a paper, just a set of notes, but still a great concept. Here we go.
Right. Let's all hope this works now.
Okay, you're here. Yeah,
Yay.
perfect. All right, we got it.
Okay. Oh, well, you get to see my whole thing before. Oh, there you go. It's all done.
No
Thanks,
worries.
everyone
Awesome.
in the
Okay.
back.
All right.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Great.
All right. So, yeah, this is kind of a strange topic, maybe, but I hope it won't feel too strange or feel strange in a good way by the end. So, bodies as care collectives. And yeah. It's about sort of trying to change the narrative a bit too. So maybe there's a little bit of hyperbole, but actually, I really mean this in a pretty almost radically literal way. So I'd be interested in, how it lands metaphorically, but also in that really literal sense. Um, Changing from this idea of competition to one of care. And by care, I mean, I just want to say right up front, it can sound so sweet and sentimental, and I really mean it in a very tense, ambiguous, powerful sort of way, which we will get to by the end. But what are bodies? I just had to use this delightful nesting of owls because, I mean, it's just great. Who am I? I'm a philosopher. I'm doing all kinds of things, and I have worked in a lot of labs and stuff, but I'm basically just a philosopher trying to understand the world. And that's, I work with the hippocampus mostly. I mean, that's like the kind of case study that I've spent most time working on in labs and stuff, but it's all towards theoretical philosophical ideas, which I've really had a long time. And this is a recent paper that goes into that side of it. I'm not going to talk about it here, but I just wanted you to know that's where I'm coming from a bit. And I have this approach called waymaking, which is another one of those words like care that can sound very sweet or whatever. But what I'm really doing here, and if you read the paper or this book that's coming out, is trying to find like a track, get things back on the same track. And waymaking comes from Taoism, actually. It's a translation of Tao, sometimes the way, sometimes waymaking. And I choose waymaking for a certain reason, but again, I won't go into all that, but it's just something to say is that in philosophy and cognitive science, we're often talking about higher and lower levels of cognition. And I'm trying to find a way to not do that, to not think about cognition in terms of like a ladder or a hierarchy. And so
Andrea,
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt,
no
but
problem.
since you're here, is it possible to
Yeah.
see you? I could see your slides, but I can only see
You can't
your
see me?
profile icon.
Oh, I thought my camera was on. I don't know. I'm sorry, Richard. I would like
Okay,
for
never
you to see
mind.
me. I thought you could see me.
I
Oh,
can't.
I can see you though, with the love. Hi, Richard, by the way. I love that love emoji.
I. Well, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I'll try and fix it again when I stop sharing the screen, but right now it says it's okay, but and no, anybody can interrupt me anytime, by the way. That's absolutely good. So trying to get beyond either or, and in a lot of other capacities, I'm also trying to get beyond either or. And yeah, that's just something to sort of orient us as we go here. So I use this term because it's important to understand that just about everything I'll be talking about here, and I think everything we do in science is a kind of a bracketing. And waymaking is just a word. I mean, you can find your own word, use whatever word you want from wherever it feels best for you, but is what cannot be bracketed because we're inside of it. And so we're constantly sort of, co-creating it. And also, I don't think it has beginnings and ends, whatever it is we're trying to understand. And I don't think we have really evidence that any of this begins or ends. Of course, it changes a lot of, forms constantly. But so that's just, why I bring in waymaking and this idea that there is no actual bracketing that's absolute, even though everything we're doing is a kind of bracketing. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. But it's essential that we bracket. It's what we do. We could even think of bodies in this way, in a sense, in the way that we study them. But there's no bracketing of the process that we're studying. So that kind of paradox is one to hold at first. And also that every time we bracket, we can't unbracket. So that's an important idea too, because everything is constantly inseparably moving and together, we don't have this unbracketing. We don't go back to whatever was before. So even though we're bracketing, nothing is ever unbracketing. And I won't go into all the neuroscience of, or not even neuroscience, but all the philosophy of this. But here's a very simple idea. You've probably heard of Edmund Husserl, who in the phenomenology, and he talks about bracketing, which actually comes from sort of skeptic and Descartes and different traditions. But it's this idea of suspending or setting aside something so that we can just have the pure experience of it, and so not like looking at the tree as the tree through that term, but just unbracketing or bracketing actually, and letting us understand, like feel the experience of it. And Heidegger thought you can't do this because you're already inside of it, so you can't like bracket yourself out of it. And so that was a kind of turn for what phenomenology was. And I'm saying both of those are sort of the case. Like, of course, there's this way making which we can never bracket, and yet we're constantly bracketing it, and that's actually how we make what we might call progress, or that's what science is, even, and in a way. And I talk about navigability as this way that we try to, like, the way making is just all of it. We can't bracket it. And then the navigability would be trying to bracket it. So we do clarify the relations and the patterns and test hypothesis. And we have to be really clear and rigorous about that. And I have very specific ways that I think we try to do that. And that's just a heuristics. I mean, again, it's not some kind of big new idea. It's just a way of thinking about what we do and what we need to be clearer about. Because once we realize we can't have a theory of everything and some absolute end theory, then we can start getting really specific about what we're actually doing with our science and our philosophy. And so it's kind of becoming more open in order to be more direct and more clear in our work. And one thing that comes up a lot, because in this navigability idea, for those of you who don't know about the hippocampus, it's like famous for memory, but it's also famous for this GPS of the brain. So that's kind of where a lot of these words are coming from too. But one thing that comes up a lot, and it relates to this where we are here together, is what is a body or what is an agent? Because I have to always talk about a position moving through some landscape. So what is that position? What is that body? And in philosophy, and I think also for many of you too, you probably get these questions of how do you tell the difference between a human and a rock, or why is everything not conscious? Why is everything not matter? So it's always trying to kind of find one side of those dualisms that we're used to and explain everything in that way. And when we are in those ways of understanding, what is a body comes up a lot. So that's what I want to talk about here. But what are we really trying to figure out when we ask this question, what is a body? I think it has to do with the fact that we really do have to differentiate and talk about things as separate, even if, everything is one inseparable, ongoingness. I mean, we have to talk about things as separate, and we experience the world in that way too. We are different, and we are responsible as bodies in different ways, even as we're also families and groups and cells and all of these other things. So trying to figure out where one thing begins and another begins, one thing ends and another begins, is very important. And these questions of what a body is end up having really big repercussions for so many things in the world, whether it's philosophical, ethical, political, whatever. Choose your orientation. And so I don't think I have to convince anyone here of why that's important, but it's also just one of the questions in philosophy that comes up again and again in many different forms. And especially in what I brought up before about these representation hungry sort of problems where when we're trying to decide what cognition is or understand cognition, then we think there's a difference between lower levels of cognition, like what maybe insects or cells or animals are doing, if we even apply that word to them, and then this kind of thinking, memory experiences that we have from first person perspective. Is everything okay? I heard something. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, everything's fine. If people are not muted, I'll mute you. Um,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. No
Okay.
worries.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, you just froze on my screen. So,
Uh,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, so it's also very interesting to think about what a body is in so many areas of biology, of course, and I would love to learn from all of you more about that. But these different ways that bodies make up other bodies, or where do we decide where a body begins and ends? And do we talk about plants as being bodies? Do we talk about every sort of body having the same sorts of rights? And then, of course, there's like a lot of new creations of bodies, or when we think about AI and technology, what is a body becomes really important. And when we are thinking in these terms, this selfish gene idea of the body seems to be taken for granted by many. So this rigid idea of or this either or sort of idea of something either is cognitive or it isn't, it is life or it isn't. And once you've decided what the body is, it's going to try to take care of itself. And we end up with these competitive metaphors. I'm generalizing a lot here because I know all of you know this much better than me, but just to bring in these ideas and how they've become, not even if they weren't meant that way when they were said originally, that they've become sort of the way a lot of people think about this stuff. And this orienting energy is one of competition. So when we are talking about what a body is, it really goes to a lot of levels of what matters for us in everyday life and how we just approach the world too. And is it about winning something over, or what is it about? So I'm just thinking, what if we start from somewhere else? And what if we start thinking the body is actually about care? And what does that mean? And is that word even possible to be used here? Sorry, I don't know why my okay. And yeah, I guess I should say that's also sort of a bracket, right? Because competition and care are also just ways we're trying to understand this. But if we try to understand the organizing activities that we call bodies as activities of care and concern, what does this mean? I think it means we have to understand them through these three words: ambiguity, tension, and I use jouissance because I don't know, it just comes to me, but I know it has all kind of implications. But I think it's this play or flow or enjoyment or, there's a lot of words for that. But that's really what I mean by it. And there's a long philosophical tradition of talking about care and concern in this way. Okay. Um, and some of those are Heidegger, for example, with Sorge, and the very structure of being, of Dasein, is a kind of Sorge for him. So this is pretty close here, even though he's not talking about it biologically. And then Hans Jonas talks about care as emergent with life itself. Care for continuation is the continuation itself of living. And there's a kind of precariousness there that he talks about that I find is very important for this idea. Also in process philosophy, you find a lot of talk about concern, or the way the word feeling is used is often in this sense. And then we have this whole ethics of care, wonderful literature with many people talking about care and going into how that actually structures a lot of these other scales that I was already mentioning. And in perspectival and relational philosophy, we have a lot of examples, but maybe Donna Haraway's most well-known on one end of that, with the staying with the trouble, making kin. She talks about care a lot. And then we have the 4E traditions, or the coming from Varela, embodied mind, discusses cognition as already caring. It's like a living system enacting a world, and that world obviously matters for it. So there's this care already involved in, they do talk about, well, Varela and Maturana, when they were talking about autopoiesis and the cell, already there's a sense of mattering, which can be a kind of concern. And in Varela's later work, it becomes care for the self. And care is already directly connected to asking, what is a body? For example, in this book, Ezekiel and Elena and Hannah are working. They actually are some of the only philosophers to ask really directly, what is a body? And even though they're going into language in the whole first part of the book, they're really talking about what is a body. And care does come up there, and it does play a role. What am I doing? I'm amplifying that here, and I'm saying something a bit more than what they're saying, but it's in there because it's in this tradition. And also, Hannah has written a wonderful piece called Loving and Knowing, which is bringing this even more into the idea of epistemology, of cognition, of caring being a way we are creating and becoming. But we still have this body, environment, agent, world, self, other thing. Like we're still separating, right? All of these things, even in a lot of these philosophies, because we need to. We need distinctions: the lived from the living, the separate, the organism from the environment. All of those are brackets. And I think once we understand them as brackets, it kind of frees us up a little bit to start thinking beyond these other terms that we've used, like physical and mental and cognitive, versus bodily, or even thinking of it organically versus mechanically. All these ways, if you really think about it, we're always contrasting like that because it's been so helpful to help us come into awareness. But maybe we're ready for something else now. Maybe that's even what this group is doing on a biological level, finding new ways to actually explore this as something beyond those sorts of dichotomies. And if we're going to do that, and they're still going to be differentiated, then how do we understand the body when we're talking about it? Because we have to talk about it in a very specific way, and we need to understand what we're talking about as bodies. And if they're not competitive, selfish genes kind of units, then could they be something like a collective of caring or something more cooperative from the start? And what would that mean? What would that shift? What would that change? How would we really think about this differently? I think we can understand bodies as this way. I think you can do it in the most literal way. If you can hold the tension of these words seeming so sentimental at first and as if we're talking about something that's not serious, right? You don't talk about these kinds of things in philosophy and neuroscience and biology, but actually, why not? I mean, what maybe we're strong enough to do that now. I think we are, and we could understand bodies as holdings of tension, as collectives of concern, as care collectives. I'm still not sure about this word collective, so I would really love to hear if anyone, whatever, if you have some ideas of a better way of framing this. But what I really mean is in the most literal kind of whatever level you want to think of as the action that is the cell or is whatever body you want to think of. That is caring. So I'm not saying the body is caring. I'm saying the body is itself is the action of caring. When you see certain cells coming together to create new cells, what are they doing? I mean, it's a kind of care, I think. And I mean that in a very tense way, in a very ambiguous way, in a way that's not easy, but does have jouissance or does have play. So we could even think of them as sites. They are the collective caring as that space, as that landscape. And I think you can look at whatever body you want to look at. And again, it's very important that we say, okay, I'm looking at the cell, or I'm looking at the human body, or I'm looking at my family, or I'm looking at this particular social group. And I see those collections of actions as concerned care towards something together, which doesn't mean there's not multiple other actions going on. There always is. I'll get to it in a minute, but that even is kind of a sign that the caring is going on. And once we start thinking of it like that, then you ask care for what, concern for what, and then you start to understand what the goal is, what the intention is, what the orientation is, or vice versa. You can start to understand what you can start with what you think is the orientation, and then start to look at what's caring for that, and you might see the body differently that you're trying to study. And so this relation of that bracketed body to the agency is the waymaking. So if we think of everything as agential, if everyone wants to think of that, just like, it's ongoing, it's movement. But that doesn't mean everything is an agent. So, but when we're studying, movement in a certain way, we look at the brackets, which are the agents. And those are usually collections of care towards some goal. So I think this is true for cells, social groups, insects, whatever, that you want to think about. And you can also start to think of that through affordances, because any of these bodies will have affordances specific to them, and things that aren't helpful to think of in this way, like perhaps a rock, we can discuss that, or a computer or whatever. Those affordances usually go back to some other care collective. My computer is wonderful, but it's affording me, not itself. So another way to think of it. But again, this doesn't mean there's some wonderful resolution, everything dissolves, we have like an answer. It's actually the unresolved action is the care, which I think is also life. Life is this tension, this ambiguity of trying to remain in movement as a particular collective, or I guess you could say form, but that's already very representational. Hans Jonas talks about it as needful freedom. This caring or tension. So your very ability to be an agent, to have any part of this ongoing agency, the waymaking itself, that is everything, to be able to be part of that and to steer it in a certain way is already a kind of care and attention that you're doing as a collection of care. All the cells are taking care of you. If you think of your body as you, then all those cells are in constant tension and care and collectively going about many, many movements so that you exist. But also you and your relations with others are doing something similar. So there's a kind of vulnerability there, but there's also that vulnerability is the strength. It is the reason that this is possible. So, and the way that those tensions change become possibilities that can open. And because so many different collections of care are happening at the same time, you don't have a straight line. You have many possibilities for what could happen for different kinds of, different kinds of emergence, I guess you could say, or tendencies, or order, or structure that are we might normally say competing, but what if we think of it through care instead? So you have a lot of things carrying towards particular continuances, and of course those are going to conflict. So you're going to have this tension at many different scales, and that's not going to be easy. That's not going to just naturally resolve. So bodies are tensions of constant becoming at whatever level you want to look at. And to be concerned is to be moving in more than one direction. That is the tension, right? Because that is there are these movements which are trying to continue some particular line, if we want to think of it representationally like that, or some life, or whatever, and they're always going to be coming up against many other sorts of tensions, and at the different scales and levels, which again, it's very hard to think about this in a kind of fractal multiplicity way. It's like a constellation of movement in all directions, would create a whole lot of generative possibility, especially, you're at the edge of chaos. It's always possible to go in a direction that isn't the one that everyone in the collective wants, so to speak. I mean, I'm speaking very metaphorically there, but isn't the one that would be, the vector, I guess, if we looked at the vector of what would be the best movement for them all. So this ambiguity and tension that I keep bringing up, it actually comes from Merleau-Ponty and from de Beauvoir, and a lot of people do talk about good ambiguity, and that is like a generative thing that when we are able to hold tension, it's a kind of portal. This doesn't mean, I mean, of course, there are ways that can be manipulated, but the first step in not choosing those ways is to understand that the tension itself is generative, because, when you understand that, your agency does increase in a way, and also your ability not to be manipulated by others who understand that increases. So we can allow this whole process, whatever it is we're trying to understand, to be unknowable. There's no theory of everything, and yet we can become more precise and clear, and in so doing increase our agency. So we still have a lot of motivation. We still have all that friction of competition, that competition in the old model explained so well, and that we need, frankly. I mean, there's a motivating force to all of this that's very important, but it doesn't mean we have to do it towards winning, or like in some absolute sense, right? And in so doing, maybe we can start to explore a lot of paths that we don't see when we have those very particular, blinders, I guess you could say, on. And we could move towards better ways of being this tension and doing this together, because meaning and value is also very tied to this. And I think you can even look at those words at a cellular level, in a sense, once you are able to hold this tension and get out of this old mindset that such words like this mean something sentimental, for example. So humans, as part of this ongoing evolution, that is care. I mean, it's almost hard to use language, because I really mean this gerund verb, caring, is ongoing. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. But also, when you start to think about the different scales of life and where we are here as part of it, and the way care develops, if you think of it evolutionarily, like we are care developing. And that's, wow, I mean, that becomes really powerful to think about what's actually happening there. And not in a sweet, sentimental way, but in a way that's really potent. And that when we can hold that tension, might give us some motivation to want to think about things a little bit differently than we might be right now in a polarized world. So I keep talking about caring, but what do I really mean? I said it a few times, but I think it's this urge for continuance. When whatever we bracket shares a similar urge for continuance, that's a care collective. It doesn't mean they don't have tons of other urges going in other directions, but there's some overall urge or some overall concern of movement that is shared with those, whatever we've bracketed as the collective. And because we can't actually ever bracket, even though we're bracketing, it's always going to be ambiguous. We could always look at this from another level, the same way we could look at the position of the cell, or we can look at the position of the organ, we can look at the position of the human body. And there's a tension in that, and that doesn't need to be resolved. There is no resolution. Sorry for my spelling mistakes here. There is no resolution because life is this openness, keeping openness and tension. And I think a lot of things about entropy come in there. And even the ways we might be thinking of emergence, because from one position, what's happening on other levels of care collection wouldn't be obvious. And it might suddenly just kind of seem like it's emerged in the sense that we mean in there's a lot of different ways to think about emergence, but that sort of comes. So this rock question, gosh, I'd really love to hear what you all think about this. I'm sure you get asked this all the time too. What's the difference between a rock, right? Why doesn't a rock have agency? Or maybe you all think, or this idea of panpsychism, or these different ways that are constantly fighting about where agency begins and ends. And it is high stakes. But first, I just want to say I think we're bracketing. It's important to say that. Bracketing is very high stakes. But I think a cell is concerned movement for its continuance. Is a rock or a crystal? Do they have a shared urge? Like, can you say all of the atoms there have a shared urge towards some continuance of movement? I mean, maybe you can. I don't know. I would like to kind of think about that more. But is it tense and ambiguous? Is there a tension and an ambiguity to it that is also its possibility of jouissance and its possibility of creation, of reproduction? What about that, And of course, we're bracketing from our position. Maybe if we were an atom or a molecule of some kind, it would look different. But again, that's an important part of what we have to be very clear about here. And why we're being clear about it. Like, why do we make this distinction and towards what goal? So there's a lot of different levels that we take all of this. And again, to be concerned is to be moving in more than one direction at once. That's part of that tension. We can feel that in our lives. When we care for something, our children, our dog, our house, our plants, there's a kind of tension in that. It's not like a wonderful, always wonderful experience. There is the jouissance or the flow or it's part of the creation of those things. And it's part of why we are so drawn to take care and be care. But there's also a tension that's, we have to find ways to bear it in a sense. And I wonder about a ball rolling down a hill or, my phone, if I really think of that in the same way, or if I think those are affording some other kind of care, back towards some other collective in a more extended sort of sense. So I guess I'm going a little over now, but yeah, just thinking of
No
this as a
worries.
character.
Take your time. No
Okay.
problem.
So again, this precarity and precariousness, I think, is a really important part of it. And starting to realize that and hold the tension as something generative and something that we don't need to resolve or, make like falsify, like or sort of live in some kind of image that's at one extreme or the other to avoid the tension, which happens a lot in representational spaces, that the vulnerability itself is strength and potential and life and precariousness. And also, I think once we start to think about that, like competitive for what is a different question than caring for what. And it doesn't mean any of the tension of the competition goes away. Maybe we even learn to feel it more strongly. Or yeah, but caring for what does start to tell us a lot about the agency. What part of the agency is able to be felt, experienced, observed in whatever particular position we're looking at in this kind of bracketing. And also that the bracketing itself starts to tell us something about what we care about. So we have all of this more fractal way, more multiplicity way of looking at all these subjects that gets us out of that either or framework. So everything's on the same track at the very same time. that we are bracketing and scaling, and we have to be very specific, much more specific than we are right now in our experiments about what the position is, what the orientation is, and what the regularities of that experiment or that context actually are. I don't think we do that in cognitive neuroscience. We definitely don't. We don't talk about what the regularities are of the experiment. We don't metricize them. We don't, it's almost, we just assume. We look, for something, and similar with the body. So what I really want to think about is how we could be more specific, and doing that through the lens of competition seems just not very fun or helpful, but through a lens of care does. And I know one question, I mean, I haven't caught up on everyone's talks here. I've tried to kind of look through it because I'm new here, but what I've seen, and just from talks with like Richard and Mike and others, is something about order comes in a lot. Like, where is the order coming from? And I wonder what it would mean to think of that as coming from care and cooperation and the tensions that that naturally sets up in any living system. If you have an urge towards a similar movement, but of course there's many, many other movements going on, isn't that already going to set up a kind of order in tension and in constraint? Towards continuance. So orders may be this shared urge for continuance when it's observed from, some bracketed position towards some goal. So also I think membranes and boundaries are really important, at least for me, to try to figure out. And, of course, like working with math and stuff, we take a lot of membranes or boundaries for granted, whether it's a Markov blanket or a cell membrane or whatever. And of course, these are also sites of ambiguity and tension at the same time that they're very clearly demarcated too. They are from our what we're looking for, whatever we're trying to understand. It's clearly an organization that shifts at some boundary. But if we think of it more as care and less as something kind of hard and stark, but rather a tension, then it's kind of, and in the scaled multiplicity way, we might be able to start to understand how these systems are working at different levels in different ways. And just big picture is just, I really want to bracket like this narrative of competition that I feel and see everywhere at all levels in the many weird worlds I'm in, and not so weird worlds, all the worlds, the most normal, mundane world from whatever position too. I just find that we're constraining ourselves with that, which is what we would also be doing with a bracket of care, but it would also open, I think, a whole lot of other unexplored possible paths. So why not try? I don't know. I mean, is it too silly? This was just some summary stuff. So we're not dissolving the boundaries or tensions when we bracket the body. We're just noticing the patterns from a position. And those membranes aren't breaks in the caring necessarily, but they do differentiate intensities. And we can mathematically show that, but we can also understand it at different scales in the same way that we could look at the bodies as membranes and cells, but we can also look at the cells as organs. And those would have very different topographical or manifolds or whatever you want to use to represent them. So yeah, thank you for caring, everyone. And I hope this doesn't sound totally crazy. And I hope it does sound a little bit crazy in a good way. And I'd love to hear what you think or how you've come across this idea of what is the body in your work, because it's very different from my philosophical cognitive neuroscience world, probably. And yeah, I would love to learn from you. And thanks for listening and letting me come here and talk to you. It's really an honor.
Wow. It's an honor for us, Andrea. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Um, so guys, now we're going to go into discussion. Usually I start off the discussion by asking a few questions, but we have a little bit less time today than usual. So, and I don't love my own questions. So I'm really eager to hear what everyone else thinks. So, um, I'm just going to go straight into the discussion part. So if you have your hand raised, I'll call on you in order. We got Wayne, Mary, Richard, then Joanna. But Frantisek actually emailed me ahead of time with some questions about this, so I'm going to start with him if he's ready to go. But when you ask your questions, guys, try to keep your follow up to a minimum because several people are usually waiting in line behind you. So, and again, if you're muted, or if you're not muted and you're not talking, I may as the host come and mute you. So be sure to check your mute button before you start speaking.
Can
And
you see
so
me? Sorry. Okay, sorry.
um, I don't I don't
It's
have you.
fine now.
Maybe if you stop sharing, you might pop up back up again.
Okay.
Um,
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Charlie. I just wanted to say
that's
one more
okay.
thing. That thing I
Yeah.
sent you guys, all, please don't, that's not like a paper or anything. That is something I put in Python from like a bazillion notes, and it's got all kind of mistakes. I was even thinking about Kate Nave, and somehow my notes for Nicole Rust got in there. So just FYI, don't think of that as a paper and don't like quote it. If you want the raw material, ask me for it. But that's all.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. Awesome. So Frantisek, do you want to speak now, or would you rather wait for later?
Okay, Charlie, I can maybe just very briefly. So I thank you very much for a very nice talk, and it was for me a little bit more philosophical topic, but still there are many common issues. So for me, the plasma membrane, as you was mentioning at the end, is the for me is the really border between life and non-life. So what is inside of the cell is living from our cell perspective, and what is outside is mostly non-living. And the plasma membrane in our synome concept gives a kind of a bioelectromagnetic field which is generating according to the sensory events. And this field started with the very first cell some 4-5 billion years ago, and is with every cell division is somehow uh, connected with cells. So our cells, all our cells are historically connected with the very first cells via these cell divisions and genome reproduction during cell division. So it is in fact a very ancient system which according our theory gives a sense of life, and it's kind of a sentience system, and the cells use the system to somehow survive in very bad situation. And for us, the primary living system is the cell, and the cells, of course, they divide and they can make multicellular systems like humans, but still we are based on the cells. And there was sometimes some discussion who is the primary and secondary, and some colleagues were convinced that cells are secondary because our bodies generate cells. But in fact, not our bodies generate cells, but the cells generate cells. So cells of our bodies generate cells. So we think that the cell is the primary living system, and it is an agent because it can understand environment. For example, stone is a body, but stone doesn't understand its environment. So for me, the stone is not agent because stone is not able to adapt, to change conformation, to change uh, constituents according to the situation outside in the environment. So this is our cell-based or cell-centric view of life. And that concept of xenoph is more complex, so I cannot now discuss this issue, but I invite you maybe to read our book or read our papers, which we published in the last 7-8 years. There are already some 25 papers published on this topic. And I think Bill Miller was already introducing it in previous discussions, so maybe you already know something about it. Thank you very much.
Totally.
Thank you so much. I want to read all those papers. I'm definitely behind in a lot of that, and yeah. So thank you. I guess they'll be easy to find. I
Yeah,
took
yeah.
some
I can
notes.
also
Yeah.
send you, or you can send me email, and I will provide you with some of
Okay.
these which are not freely accessible. Thank you.
Yeah, let's do that. And because I'm concerned, not concerned, but one other question, which would be too much to go into here, is this problem solving, and but I think what you said feels really important and right to me, especially about the cell. It also makes me wonder, we're discussing it from a human position, what from the cellular position, what would you think? But I'll save all those for later. I'll look at your papers first because you probably answer some of that stuff. But thank you for your
Yes.
comment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Totally. Wayne?
Hello, guys. Thanks for a great talk, Andrew. It's pretty interesting. I guess I just want to comment also about the kind of the rock question. I would say that I'm kind of a post-Whiteheadian. I tend to be, so I am, I guess, a pan-experientialist, and I don't deny that some vector of feeling really goes all the way down. However, agency, I think, is kind of a deeper question. So for me, agency. That comes first, and then you get these. That's when you get agent arena relationships, and you get affordances, which are real transdirective relations that are contextual in time, and they aren't things. An affordance is a real relation of fittedness. But I guess what I was about to say is that the reason I would say a rock is not an agent is because a rock doesn't have to actively do things against what would be, say, the second law, third law, thermodynamics, or however you want to think of it, doesn't actually have to do work to maintain itself in the world. Where an agent would be something that actually must engage in doing. So once you have to engage in doings to maintain your precarious existence, now you're in a position where affordances relative to that becomes salient. I don't know. I guess that's all I really want to say here for now. There's a million things we could say, but
That's great. I love that word transdirectional. Is that like a normal kind of term that I
it's
just
transjective. Actually, it's
transject?
John Vervaeke coined that term.
Oh, Vervaeke. Okay, I
Right.
thought
So
I'd heard.
it's
I
kind of
still
from
haven't
the
studied Vervaeke.
modern Neoplatonic kind of point of view.
Yeah, that's good. I wonder when we were talking about work there and could it be understood as care from this way that I've presented, or does that just seem
Uh,
totally crazy
I,
to you?
well, I think care has to do with precariousness. As you were saying, work is kind of a physical thing that's related to the world. And of course, now here we're bracketing. Once we start talking about sort of this physics, at least classical physics point of view. But work means that things that would not happen spontaneously in the current epoch uh, are require work to make them happen. In other words, water does not roll uphill, by itself, for instance, or heat doesn't flow from hot to cold. So an agent actually can do things actively to make those things happen, and this is done because it helps them maintain their precarious state and to keep themselves in a way that they want to be, which is alive, we might say.
So when they're working, like when a cell is working towards whatever we want to say, what does a cell work towards? Maintaining its.
Well, I mean, at the very basic level, a cell engages in moving towards chemical gradients. It has to do this by rotating cilia, which actually make it move, and this requires, in at least in our planet, it requires the ATP. In other words, you have to release energy and use that
Right.
energy to do work against a gradient.
So you have like the mitochondria and all these parts doing this action towards the same work, right?
Yes,
Or not?
that is
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm trying to say about that would be for me an expression of the tension of care because they're all moving, doing different things, but it's towards this collection of whatever they care about or whatever. I mean, of course, I'm anthropomorphizing, but if I could not use language and that could be as immediate as possible, that what we've bracketed as mitochondria and cell membrane and cilia and all of those things are an urge towards the same continuance is basically what I'm saying. But anyway,
Yeah.
I'll be quiet now. But it's very interesting to think about the work thing, and especially at all the many different scales in which we think of work and care, and that those maybe aren't the same, but are they? And so that's really interesting.
This is, and this is something that comes up with Mike Levin a lot, that he talks about a lot, is that, yeah, you do have this work done and you do have caring and you do have, to a certain extent, cognition at many different levels, and now we're bracketing. But the mitochondria, it's sort of like the mouse getting a piece of cheese. The experience of satisfaction for getting the piece of cheese isn't experienced by any of the aspects, if you want to say lower, for want of a better word, in hierarchical. None of them experience the satisfaction, but they all cooperate to make this happen. So the question is, where is the cognition that causes all this to coordinate?
Yeah, I think
Right.
I'm trying to get so basic that I think that is the cognition. That movement that's why it's very hard, like even for me to express. But if you really think of making way, that at the most basic level, there's something we have to make our way through, right? But this cell making way is already for me a cognitive act. And I don't mean cognitive in the way we use that word. It's cognitive way before anything we think of as cognitive, like thinking, is cognitive. So, yeah, it's but more, I wonder, all of you, I'll just put it out there. Does anything in the cell have something like flow or jouissance or I don't mean joy in the way that we experience it as humans, but some state of something like floating, where there's not a state of work, even if it's just a moment of that or something, some kind of ATP excitement. I don't know, but I'll just leave that. But a lot of good ideas.
Cool. Awesome. Mary?
Hey, y'all, you have to forgive me. There's literally 4 teams working on this house that I'm in at our farm in Maine, so lots of noise. Thanks for your presentation, Andrea. I put my primary questions in the chat, so I'll read here. The first question is, my most literal brain is hearing attention as being at tension, and is that what you mean? Are those ideas connected for you? And then jumping off of that, I've been thinking a good bit lately about inertia, including inertia of attention, and how much of our flow state or experience of beingness and identification as a body is based on the inertia of current states of attention and the free energy principle, the avoidance or reluctance to extend or expend towards a change. So I hope that wasn't too much at once, but maybe you can make something useful of that.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool to think about attention and at tension. I had not thought of that. That is really cool. And I wonder about the roots of that tension and tension.
Well, they probably both have to do with tending.
Yeah, care is also part of that then, and
Yeah,
concern.
right.
So yeah, that makes me have a computational explosion of delight, and I'll have to check into it. But I do think that attention and what we put our awareness on, that's really important here and also really hard to talk about. But that is the kind of bracketing that we're doing at this language level. But also, I think, a sugar gradient could be a kind of,
Yeah.
attention. So, and the next one, gosh, how much of the experience of beingness and identification as a body is based on the inertia of current states and the free? I'm not sure about the free energy principle here because even though I deal with that a lot and I'm on the board and stuff, like that for me is a framework that would be, I mean, it would take the rest of the time to think about that. But this first part, the experience of our beingness and identification based on the inertia, that I love, the inertia, especially. I
Yeah.
think it's, and I think I get what you're getting at here is we're coming from a kind of trajectory, right?
Yeah.
That is determining what we're even able to notice and
Right.
what we're going to care about, what we're going to move towards, however we want to say this. And yeah, I think that's incredibly crucial. And in that stuff I just barely mentioned, that's actually part of that ongoingness of understanding we're bracketing something that will always have this kind of history or trajectory that needs to be metricized in the models and thought about and individualized because we don't all have the same, nor does every cell. And yes, that seems really overwhelming, but now we have this technology, right? Like why not put it to use for something like this? To be able to model, to understand we're bracketing, but to model as many possibilities of trajectories as possible, as close as possible to that beingness, just to get a better view, to open up into more multiplicity and to take seriously that phenomenological heritage, that beingness that we all as beings are using to move through the world, which for me is an act of care, Uh, so yeah, that's a really cool thing to bring up, and it's something I really wanted to talk about, but I feel like it's such a deep, big subject, but just that historical kind of continuity of the body as the movement that is always preceded by other movement, and that actually has a lot to say about what that body is really important. So thanks for bringing that up.
You're
And I don't
welcome.
hear any noise in your background, so no problem there.
Oh, you can't hear the noise. It's quite loud. Um,
Sorry for you.
just really quickly, I'm now that I've been transported from Colorado to Maine, which is such an entirely different place. I feel like the way that I'm just attending and just being, I'm noticing more and more, and it's changing me, and I'm changing in relationship to the background because I'm in reflexive attention, and that just seems very crucial and very much related to the inactivist kind of point of view. That's all I'll say.
That's a beautiful point too. That fits very well with both of the other points you made because you've changed your regularities, right? And so you're having to attend to different things, which is actually a kind of weirdly a kind of agency, but also stress and tension that requires you to kind of, you know, create or enter into different sorts of relations than usual. So actually, that's a really beautiful example, I think, of that tension that is care and that is kind of trying to find the balance. And also the way that the past, the trajectory can change and sometimes, radically does, but is still there too, guiding. Yeah. And the way that your attention on that very process, I mean, you being able to think of it that way is actually a kind of agency.
Thank you.
Nice. Richard?
Andrea, thank you so much. Thanks for beginning with just framing it as what would it be like if we took a contrarian stance to the idea of competition or self-interest and just explored how far we can get by taking it from that completely opposite side. So first, a quick comment that I noticed that every time you said care, you added, or many times that you added, not in a sweet sentimental way, right? And I'm like, yeah, why not in a sweet sentimental way, right? That is actually the motivation for not wanting to do it in a competitive way. So, between you and I, but we don't have to say it out loud in public to other people. Uh, let's own that, right? In the same way that you said, maybe we are strong enough to talk about a word like care now, right? So I notice, I'm reminded of how Thomas Doctor and Mike Levin and others, Olaf, used the word care in their paper, Care as a Driver of Intelligence. And it's like, why did you use the word care, Thomas? Why didn't you use the word love? I know you mean love. You know you mean love. Why didn't you say love? It's like, well, you can't use love, can you? Because, why? Because it's too sweet and sentimental. So I'm just noticing that same trend, but I absolutely honor your drive to flip the narrative and start from the other side. But my question is, so the thing the thing that makes everything is, I love the collective care as a way of talking about what the thing that we're trying to talk about. And the thing that, um, stuck for me, the thing that, was like a red flag was that it was collective care. When you're talking about collective care for what? And you said it's towards something together. And I'm with you. And then you say for continuity. And I'm like, meh, like why for continuity, right? So the thing that I think is fundamental that I'm trying to get away from in the way that I think about things is that everything is about self-preservation. Everything is about continuity of the self. It's about survival. It doesn't have to be about reproduction because we might not have a Darwinian system, but it's still about persistence. And I wonder how far you can get with an idea like collective care without it being collective care for continuation. Can you help me with that?
Thank you, Richard. It's always so wonderful to talk to you. I just want to say that. And thanks for those great questions. And I have a lot to say, so I'll try to be a little bit more concise. I hope I didn't, I probably did say continuity, but I meant continuance. And I know that doesn't matter for you, but I think maybe we don't see this as the same way. So just to frame it from the
Okay.
last question in a kind of meta way, there's a continuance that we can't get away from. There is a trajectory when we bracket it's going to be a trajectory, but we are ongoing, right? In the way making. There's not a you don't get out of that. You don't separate from that. So anything you're going to bracket, you can bracket, but you can always see how it's connected to something if you want to think of it in time, in the past. And of course, we can frame all these things in all sorts of different ways, but I think it's very hard to, you can't take anything out of anything. So how is there not going to be something about continuance? And why does that have to be about preservation of a particular kind? So Mary moved to a new place and she could think of it like she wants it to be exactly like it was she's in Maine now and in Colorado. So if she wanted it to be exactly like it was in Colorado, that's, I guess, trying to preserve some. I mean, that would be strange, right? And we do try to do that, and there is a kind of like I see that negativity in that's a very toy example, but I would maybe you can point me to very specific things in your work so I could understand it better. But I just think we don't get away from the connection. We don't get out of it. So that's what that we can unbracket, and we even can't bracket.
So you don't
So
mean a persistence. We're talking about trying to define what a body is as a collective care for continuance, but you don't mean continuance of the body.
no, because the body is ambiguous. So if we talk about the cell or whatever, it's a continuance of some movement, and probably that movement changes. That's why the ambiguity part is so important because you're only bracketing, right? There's no one thing to preserve. I am not one thing. I'm a different thing with all of you. If we all had different conversations together alone, we'd be, you'd bring out different parts of me. And I still can talk about me because there's a kind of enough regularities going on in my body such that I can do that. So that's the holding the paradox thing that I'm trying to do. And the really weird, radical thing that's very hard to talk about because even when we think we're not putting things into these boxes, myself included, I probably did it like 20 times in the talk when I go back and listen, but we do tend to preserve, I think, in that negative way that you're thinking about through assumptions. And I'm trying to open all that up and say, like, you can't do that. It's not even, it's always a bracket. And we're all actually interbeings, if you want to get, like, since it's just you and me here, we're all interbeings. We're all co-creating together. There isn't a beginning and an end. So, like, let's accept the responsibility of that with the agency that we have kind of come into at this moment, is kind of what I'm saying. And I do have a trouble because when people hear care, they shut off because of exactly what we're talking about. They have a trajectory of that word. So I feel like even though it is, love is everything. Like why do anything, right? Without love. You and I have talked about this. Yeah, I'm with you, but I also know that most people hear love and care and they do turn away or they just are uncomfortable or they think I'm being naive, that I don't see that actually the insect eats the other insect. There's a lot of like n not very caring actions that occur towards caring. And I feel like it's very important that we actually accept that too as part of care. Otherwise, you'd never get away from the competitive model because we do fight and we do want to, we do try to, we do, exist as things that try to preserve. And if we want to change that idea of preservation, then I think we have to maybe we have to jolt ourselves a little bit. But at the same time, I do believe in love and I take a lot of, stuff for using those kind of words. So I can understand why people hesitate about it because you are less likely to be taken seriously in certain circles, especially the ones I'm in. So it's a tension for me, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I appreciate the pushback and that you actually want to hear that. I think the more scientists and people who understand it the way you do, the better we are. But trying to get to that point, where you are is not where most people are that I talk to in a lot of these other environments.
For sure. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Richard.
I'm glad you guys are both in the right place. Oh, Joanna?
Hi everyone. Hi Andrea. Sorry, my camera is off because I'm not with very good connection. I loved your talk. I loved reading about your work, especially your work on holding paradox. I find that so important. I am a bioengineer working on the origin of cells from a geobiochemical mathematical point of view. So I have a bit of the same issue. I'm also very interested in philosophy. I have a bit of the same issue that Richard has. I love care. I love your use and your daring to use care. I think care is right, but caring for what? And I think that's a lot of the debates we have around agency. So you're an agent, but what's your goal? What are you striving for? And I think, as Richard, that continuity or persistence might not be the easiest to defend. So, for instance, I spoke in the chat, crystals persist for a long time, some of them for millions of years. They also have tons of order, so you don't need the biological world to bring order into this universe. The mineral world does that already. At the same time, yeah. So I wonder if you've considered, I'm going to push a bit further there, press more on that pedal of, have you considered caring for something else than persistence? Because as what I heard from your answer to Richard, you're referring to the whole when you're saying, okay, it's the persistence of the whole, but then you're trying to define a body that you bracketed. And then if you have to refer to the whole again, you end up needing the whole to define that which you just bracketed. So I wonder if you've considered other caring for. I have my humble attempts, but I'm curious to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. I would love to hear how you've tried because a lot of this for me is I feel like I have a similar goal as you and Richard. And so a lot of this is coming from different terminology, worlds and stuff too. So it would be really helpful to hear how you've done this because I'm not, also it would have taken me a while to explain, but so we have the waymaking, which is everything, but then I do think about navigability. So we're always going to look at some, particular landscape and somebody trying to do something in that landscape. And so that's more kind of the way I was trying to think of this, of what is that body or that position, taking it really seriously in the context of whatever it's trying to make its way through, right? And being really specific about that, and thinking about the for what within that, which could be, by the way, like there's many scales. It might be that we are just taking one scale to look at when there's, let's say 50 others in a kind of constellation going on at the same time, but we haven't been able, we can't like take all of that in. So with our science, we look at one area of it. I'm still, I want to understand better why continuance and persistence are like negative. I think it would have, I needed to read some more of the literature and stuff, because what I really mean, I guess, is understanding, but that's only from our position. So again, that would really have, someone would have to really understand that what I mean by cognition is not higher order thinking only, that it's actually how we make our way through anything. And that's really what I'm talking about, is the body making its way. But that doesn't have a beginning or an end or anything. So when we're doing science, we have to be more specific and say that we're bracketing. So there's a whole, I mean, there's like 200 pages behind all those things I just said that I've written to try to explain them. So I know I'm not explaining it well, but what might help me is if you show me another way, or how you all think of this differently, and then I could, that might
Thank
open
you.
up something.
Thank you. I'd love to talk to you more about this. So the way I've been thinking about it is through the lenses of modeling. Could also be learning. So trying to figure out what this all is in relation to myself. And I think a bacterial cell does that, and life does that from the beginning. It creates a model of what it is versus what it is not. There is a cognitive scientist in the US, Dr. Mark Miller, that reached the same conclusion. I don't know if you heard of him. He's also in the Eastern philosophy kind of game like us. I love that you mentioned the Tao. I also have a lot of questions about why we want to talk about this with new names. I feel like this has all been known for eons. The Taoists have known that, Buddhists have known.
You're Millie.
But anyways, I think the goal probably is, and we're agents towards a better understanding, a better model of the world.
Oh, wow. Okay, you're just opening up a lot of can of worms there. We might just have to talk later because I think I do know Mark Miller. I think he maybe works with Julian, who is somebody I've talked to a lot. Is it an active inference kind of connection too, and emotions? Anyway, it doesn't matter, but you can tell me later. But the thing is, when you talk about modeling, or a model. I don't think that we have models. I think, this is something I've talked to Carl Friston about a lot and others that, this assumption of the cognitive map in hippocampal research, where we tend to assume there's something inside of us that's a little representation or a model or a map. But for me, this is a dynamic thing. We're constantly modeling. Yes, but we don't have models. And that's part of what
I don't think we have them. I think we are them. I think that's different.
Yeah, that's kind of what Carl ends up going towards too, is he's yeah. And I think that's right, but we are modeling, We're not the model. There's not like it's changing all the time as we move and as we go. So I'm not sure, but I think I agree with what you're like the vector idea and what you're saying there. So maybe you can send me some of your stuff that inspires you or stuff you've written or whatever, and I could get a better idea and then we could talk because I don't think we are trying to get to this different kind of understanding here, but it would be helpful for me to be able to talk to you about this and refine what I'm saying once I've done so, once I've read some stuff. So you have my email, I guess, just
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just wanted to press on this continuity persistence thing because it ends up being an issue. But thank you.
That's
certainly on the
new to
right
me.
path.
That's new to me, so that's wonderful that you all are helping me understand that in a different way. So I need to understand it better, though, obviously, and try to find ways to discuss this that's not falling into those routes that you all are hearing when you hear those words. So thank you. Let's talk later.
Thanks. Cool. That was great. Anthony?
Hello. Hi, Andrea. I don't think we've met before, but thank you very much for your talk. I think it was very thought-provoking.
Hi, Anthony.
I'm going to pick on two words that you used, and I'm not doing this to be persnickety, but just because that's what I noticed. One was the word collective or collectivity that you mentioned. And the one thing I would say about that, just in passing, is why does that not simply recapitulate the problem at a lower level? So when you talk about a collective, you're sort of evoking a thing like a set in set theory, where you have a bunch of atomic entities that have no relationship to one another that are smashed together into a bucket and call it a collective. I think you probably mean something else than that, but that word sort of brings it out. And then you've just kind of pushed the problem down to the atomic entities that make up the collective. Now they don't have any kind of internal structure or any kind of motivation or caring of any kind other than to be stuck together into the collective. So I'll just leave that at that. That wasn't really the thing that I wanted to talk much about, but I think that's a word that maybe needs a little more thought. But the one thing that I really hooked onto was your slide about what is caring. You phrased it two different ways, and I think there's a enormous distinction between the two. One was concerned movement for continuance, I guess, of the collective or whatever you want to rename that to be. The other was, and this I think is better, the urge for continuance or a shared urge for continuance. And I think those two phrasings are not synonymous. And in fact, they hide the crux of the problem because that word urge in there is what distinguishes from they just happen to do that physically, or entropy pushes them that way and they happen to do that. Urge is suggesting something else, right? And the first thing that popped into my mind was Bergson's notion of durée, for example. I'm sure you're familiar with this, and how that's different from, and he's very clear about how that's different from sort of a flip book view of the world where this is the scene now, and then this is the scene an instant later, and this is he says, no, 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 there's something else going on here these are all sort of a fusion into a trajectory that can't be sliced up in this way. And to me, that's the problem. I feel like a lot of these sort of ideas are dancing around the difference between, this flip book view of the universe where we go from state to state to state according to some kind of law, and a sort of fluid pushing along that Dure conjures, and that we really have not been trained to think about or talk about, and actually have been actively told not to think in those ways for about a century at this point. I mean, Bergson was shouted down by Bertrand Russell and by Einstein and so on. Um, about a century ago, I guess it was at this point. But I feel like he was onto something. It has some notion of like what Newton used to call impetus before it turned into force, which is like an external physical thing. It's sort of like what is urging forward this motion? Why is this thing doing that and not something else? In physics, it's all very mechanical or entropic in nature, but is there anything else going on? And I feel like that's the question, really. Is there anything else besides that going on? So I wanted to say that because that slide has that word urge on it, and that's the slide in my mind. That's what I saw on that slide. Everything else seemed a little bit beside the point. Um, and I'll stop there.
That's just awesome, Anthony. I can't, it's hilarious too, because it's actually the very two things that bug me. And I actually didn't like the definition, the first one I gave, and I went back and put the urge in for exactly that reason. And it is for everything you said. I mean, I have creative evolution right here in front of me, and
Good. Yeah.
Bergson. Yeah, I mean, I'm like literally looking at it. And so everything you said, it's yes, 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 and collective too. I don't know if I put it in these slides. I mean, I was kind of playing with the words because it's carrying collecting, but it's not collecting either. Like that's what's so hard with what Mary brought up too, or this trajectory thing, and why I start with waymaking and I say we're bracketing exactly for the reason that I don't want to do what you said at the beginning of saying everything at the lower or higher level has more or less agency in some kind of in this older way of thinking. And also that the urge is the urge. It's there. There's no beginning or end to the urgeness. That's what I mean by waymaking, and that we don't understand what that is. We don't know, like, I mean, we don't need to. Like we don't have to, at least, to bracket and understand better how to help more of us have more responsibility and agency, or whatever our we might be trying to do, health and things like this. So, those two things are really hard for me, mostly on a linguistic level, not on an understanding level, but more because, you read something like Bergson, and then I also really like something like, I mean, these different conceptions of space and time, and how do we hold what's generative in those without we either are Bergsonian or we are this, that whole push, which is really a strong one in philosophy, but also in the study of mind and cognition underneath, because we already come with these assumptions of what mental is and what emotional is, and what that emotional is not cognitive, when of course for me it's very cognitive. So it's what I tried to do, what I'm trying to do, and I will probably be continually trying to do, is with that waymaking, in that idea that nothing can be bracketed but we bracket, is exactly to your point there. And I don't know what words will express that across all of these multiple differences. I don't think collective is it, but I haven't found the way to express that yet. But I definitely mean, and also everything is much looser, because when you bracket, I can be looking at the cell as many parts carrying collectively towards some action, but I could also bracket that same cell differently and look at those things differently. So I'm trying to loosen that a bit, right? By making it more precise, so that we can talk about it in different ways without falling into those traps that you mentioned. But you actually absolutely picked up on two of the things that have been bugging me, and that and I like the urge better too, and I put it in there, but I left the other one because of this difficulty I'm having. So you definitely nailed it there. So if anything comes to mind that you think might be beneficial relative to that, it sounds like we have similar kind of interests. So do let me know, and thanks for raising those because yeah, maybe others have ideas too, because those are real issues for me of how to express that clearly and not reduce. It's not reduction, but it's real. It's realism without reduction. It's perspectivalism. You know, it's like a lot of these things, and none of these things, but it's definitely creative evolution too with the urge. So yeah, I know I'm way too excited, but thanks for just raising those points because they really, yeah, they worry me in a good way, that like caring way.
Very good.
Nice. Awesome. Henry?
Hi, I enjoy your talk, and I, I need to just introduce myself a little bit as a background. So what we are studying is study the pattern of evolution. So the evolution actually how it happened. So in contrast to the Darwinian stepwise accumulation, we found that evolution whole process is about cycle of two-phased evolution. So with this idea, we realized the macroevolution first to create a new information, new carrier, and a new ecosystem, right? And then the microevolution just for the conservation, because they just preserve the information, amplify the information, and modify the information. So that's the framework I'm thinking. So you know where I come from for the question to you. So
Sorry, just to clarify, so you're trying to break through that last tradition that you just said with the first one that you explained, right?
yes, so
Okay,
therefore
okay.
we actually realize that the evolution is not the ones, I mean the slow progress, gradually and become different species, because this is very matters according to how to understand your caring as such. So because of that, now we know that evolution is not Darwinian described, is completely not. So therefore, many of our thinking, need based on this new framework, at least as a comparative study, right, as such. So I like you describe the caring, but if you're thinking that's the domain of the description, and above that, you can go more, you can go love, you can go unselfishness and moral, or even tribalism, everything can go on in terms of complexity, right? But you also can go down. You go down, you become, learning capability, cognition, evolvability, and the information increase the complexity. So you can see what I'm talking about, the different, scale, different domain. But interestingly enough, for all these different domains, you actually can find the position in the history of evolution, right? So you put what I'm talking about, I mean, you care in the middle, they have so many above and so many lower, but you put the scale of the history of evolution, is suddenly everything makes sense. So you can say why we need separate the care from bacteria and from human is because that based on the fundamental difference of the information complexity. So we have to acknowledge that because even different care is involved, right? But during the history of evolution, they actually involve different law to control the system of how to care, right? So in the future, the human's care will be much more different from right now's care. Right now, we care the family, care more, but maybe in the future, we care something totally different, right? So that is showing during the history, so initial single cell, gradually, every time the domain is actually fundamentally change how the biological operation. So based on this idea, now all of a sudden we realize evolution always happened at the very beginning. When the evolution captures the self-organization, everything into biological, evolution, macroevolution lost its function. It's no longer there, right? So the evolution question become biological question. So everything is biological. So for example, the first cell captures the mitochondria, become fully, so body, right? And then every cell is just by cell dividing, they automatically have all this miracle. So the no longer is a macroevolution problem anymore. It's a biological problem. Until next stage, they become multicellular. The evolution again put the package as a multicellular. But after that, evolution, macroevolution lost its power again. It's biological. Because no matter how complicated, it's just a multicellular life cycle issue. No longer is evolutionary issue. So that's the same thing. Move to the cognition, move to your care, and then move to next beyond the care. So my question to you is, all of these domains certainly have lots of overlapping. How do we separate this overlapping, and how do we actually push them as a whole, as a system whole, into the next phase of evolution? So therefore, I really thinking, I noticed that like Richard talking about, Charlie talking about the, learning capability, love, everything. But I really want we to just hold for a second to realize the system complexity, in fact, is increased dramatically. So therefore, we have to consider such as a background, because now we realize the information themselves, carry themselves, ecosystem themselves, they're always different. We cannot get back as such. So in that sense, how to, to consider this overlapping and the scale complexity in terms of caring, in terms of the self-learning, in terms of cognition, in terms of future. So that is really my question, right?
Thank you so much. I think I don't have enough background to address it all wonderfully, but there's some really exciting things you brought in there that that I think show also that maybe I didn't. Yeah. So I don't think there's a ladder of something where you don't care and then you love. And sorry, the sun set, so I don't know if you can even see me anymore. But I don't think of care like that. And what I'm trying to get at is this primordial action, which I'm calling care, because I think care is the word close enough to what it is. But it started way before a human could start thinking about words like care. And so that's why I try to say we can't. There's not a. I want to get away from the hierarchy, the ladder, the idea that there's something below and above. And to do that, I'm trying to kind of, so usually that hierarchy is built on binaries, assumed binaries that we just sort of like climb up, contrasts, in everything from the way we model, with some exceptions, of course, but just to the way we talk about it every day. But what I mean by care there's no hierarchy, there's differentiation, of course, but the differentiation is based on whatever position you're looking at, whatever kind of body, right, that you have, or whatever landscape you're looking at. But all of it's ongoing, and you can't bracket it all at once. And to your point about the complexity, that's the kind of what I was trying to get at with saying we can't unbracket, because everything that every scientific theory, but also every new life, or every new from the perspective of being from us looking at it right here now, is changing all of that waymaking. So there's no going back. And I think that's kind of what complexity is too, but it's also that we become more attentive to it, right? So that there's more and more and more that we can try to understand through bracketing, to the point where we might, completely exhaust ourselves. So we invent technology to help us do this, and so on and so forth. But I don't see that. I don't see that love is above care or something like that.
No, you misunderstood me. What I'm saying is this: is because they have different domain involved by the simply complexity themselves, right? So therefore, for us study them, we need to prioritize different stage of the history. So the care in the future will be more important, but it will be perhaps slightly little, prioritize them. Because as we know, for example, when the cell solve information, solve energy problem, that's capture the mitochondria, that energy part is prioritized over anything else. So every stage of history, they actually nature prioritize the process. So we should do the same thing accordingly because we can reflect the history. Otherwise, we just artificially use our human-centric idea just to push all the system in the way we understand. But
yeah, I agree with that.
But it could be completely different. But if we put the historical contingent concept, then we actually can really put the care, love in the future even more and more important. But actually is not that very important at the very beginning. So that's
yeah.
the idea. I mean, you can go to a new way to way, but then we need to respect the historical facts, right? Otherwise, we can get all this idea, but then we ignore what evolution actually happened is in our mind. It's not in our mind.
Yeah.
Is in the
No.
history.
I mean, this is wonderful because this is exactly the kind of reason I'd say I don't mean sweet and sentimental and stuff like that too, because what I'm using for care is I don't think it's going to get like more important or less important. You can't escape it. It's like what we're talking about. So, but I also absolutely agree with you. There's so many dimensions, and these have to be further clarified in exactly the way that you say. So, in some way, I'm sort of trying to say that. I'm trying to say that we need to be more specific about these domains. That's what I probably call landscapes, right? And that any kind of bracket that we make and call a body is just one bracket. Somehow we need to use our technology to understand that constellation of domains that is ongoing. But I'm trying to unstick that from the actual ongoing process. So it's not that we're studying this like process directly every time. We're studying as some part of it from within it. So yeah, we need to like, there's so many domains. I agree with all of what you just said, and it can be completely overwhelming, but I think we're not going to be able to do that because we're part of it. So we try to develop the best ways we can to represent the most domains we can and understand the complexity as much because I absolutely agree with you, I mean, wherever we want to start in the past and wherever we want to look to the future, if we look at that, then what care is in the way that I mean, or what this activity is and what it's prioritizing are going to be very different. But right now, in this moment, we can kind of have some agency over that, maybe, so I'm looking at it in that domain when I talk about it in a more general way, but I definitely don't think of it as like a choice for love, right? I don't think there's a choice here in the sense of that the action is the action. I know that's maybe not making a lot of sense, but if you had something I could better understand about the domains, maybe I would. But I think we're on this. What I mean by landscapes and what you were saying about domains is exactly like a problem that I want us to look at more complexity and more domains at once. Yeah.
Nice. Kate? I think you're still muted. I think you're might be still muted.
Thank you.
There we go.
Hi, Andrea. Apologies for jumping in late. Time in our house is more quantum than Bergsonian flow. However, I did look at your work when Charlie first introduced it, and I want to say you are a kindred soul on so many levels. I love your use of the Tao. I love the humility of the way you're presenting your work and the openness and the questioning. And everything you're saying resonates very much with my own work. I'm an emotion theorist, and emotion to me is different than cognition. In fact, it's older and more ancient than cognition. And the process that you're describing as wayfinding and care is right there because originally, I argue that emotion is a sense, and that when you look at actually sensory motor circuitry, it's in place way before more cognitive capacities, if you will. So what is moving the body? What is helping us find the way? What is identifying features and affordances in the external environment is how we feel about it. And our whole stress chemistry and everything all the way up, and but what I'm hearing that's missing, and it might be because I haven't given your work sufficient attention, is this business of domains and bracketing and how everything is ultimately interconnected. And yet there are these parts and wholes that are working together in terms of a whole being an agent that's in an environment, interacting with an environment. And yet you can say that about human beings, obviously, and our social environment, but you can also say about cells in tissue environments and atoms in molecular environments. And those are the kinds of principles that I think you're working with and looking for that kind of universality and rooting care in the wayfinding process. And I want to say kudos to you. Don't pay any attention to the horrible taboos against the feminine in science. And in fact, I want to say that with ever more emphasis now that I've been poking around in the Epstein files and realizing how that taboo is instantiated in deeper and broader and sexist and misogynist ways than I ever even imagined. So screw that. The sacred feminine is absolutely missing from science. And if you listen to people like Ian McGilchrist, it's literally an entire brain hemisphere. So when you talk about how these are different, really difficult concepts to articulate, you're absolutely right. It's because they're coming from that part of the brain. And emotion is connected with that. And I've been digging deep into the physics of it all the way down. And the things I've been thinking about are, how do we define identity? How is it bounded? Because it is bounded. It's in not self distinctions all through our regulatory stuff. And it is one of the biggest problematics in terms of our own identity boundaries, in terms of caring, who we care for. Do I care for someone who's not in my tribe? Or do I absolutely hate somebody that's not in my tribe? So these dynamics go all the way up and all the way down. So my question to you is, how do you approach the concept of identity? When I hear bracketing and interconnection, I hear boundary making. And to me, the boundary that demarks the self as a collective versus it's not self-environment is really fundamental here. And physics gives us very short shrift on what boundaries are. So, and they're also open boundaries: thermodynamics flow and information flow. So the three things that I think are missing from the deeper physics that we need to address with the sacred feminine is the idea of identity and what that means for information flow, and value. We haven't talked about values at all because it's taboo in science. And yet love and caring is nothing but value. It is value for something. And the question of what is the goal? What is the model building? What is the goal toward what? That what is the development of the self and the actualization of potentials of the self. That to me is sort of what's at the bottom of this. And yet the self is both an autonomous agent, a whole in its environment, and a collection of parts at every level. So that the kind of organization and operational constraint and informational flows within that identity structure is going to be paramount to all of those questions, I think. So I ask you, having not, and apologizing for not really digging as deeply into your stuff as you deserve, what do you think about identity and value?
Thank you so much for that, Catherine. Thank you for raising those points, which are very important, like many of them actually. And I think we should probably talk about this. Like, there would be a lot to talk about in terms of all of those themes. So I probably can't address it all, but I think so. I don't know if you know the work of Mark Solms or Panskip or these.
I do.
Okay,
I
and what do
do.
you think about that feeling?
I think Panksepp, the difference between computation, cognitive computation, and affective computation is a profound distinction that needs to be emphasized far more in neuroscience. I have my own work on this, advocating that emotion is a sensory mechanism for as old as cellular organization, and its signal processing chemistry is still evident all the way up, and that what we experience as emotion in basically binary. So there is a binary story here that connects with a computational story. Basic pleasure and pain are two categories of experience that are laden with coarse graining all the way up from these dynamics and principles and values and identity boundaries within our body. But we're sending identity messages down all the time as we get about in an environment, especially through our stress chemistry. So the positive and negative emotion is distress and eustress, and there's a direct line all the way down to, if you're familiar with Richard's work about mechanical stress models. Anyway, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm more than happy to share ideas with you. In fact, we should get Joanna and have a three-way Zoom, because Joanna Xavier's my soul daughter.
Oh yeah, let's do that. And maybe you can send me, I think I've come across your work. So maybe you can send me some things too, because we could even do it for Love and Philosophy, because it's a perfect kind of conversation. I mean, if we wanted to do it public, but we don't have to. But also like so this is very hard, and it's part of why I do all of this. What I think everything starts with feeling and emotion in the most basic level. And I think that's cognitive, but I don't think that's cognitive in the way that we use the word cognitive. So what I think is everything that is cognitive comes with and from and completely inseparably from our feeling and our emotion. And those can be used in a lot of different ways. And forgive me, I'm not being precise. But I really want to prioritize that actually. And I don't think it's a continuum in the sense that you're feeling and then suddenly you're cognitive. This is also gets me very like all of this is happening at the same time. And it's a kind of way that we make through the world, which is better than thinking of it as cognitive. But at the same time, I think it's as important as and should be taken as seriously as and in the same venues as all the debates about cognition and intelligence and so forth, which is why I do always kind of put it in there instead of like making it get left to the side, because I don't think you can leave it to the side.
Good for you. Are you Whiteheadian at all?
Whiteheadian?
Whitehead.
Oh, Whiteheadian. I am not Whiteheadian, but I like Whitehead and I should go back to it. I read it, gosh, it's been a long time, but the prehension, I think, is exactly very close to what I'm trying to express with that. Although that already fits us into binaries of like, then you become conscious. I really think conscious, like I just think of, you're born into the world and you have to make your way. You're already making your way, before in ways like you're different, as you were saying, part wholes. We could look at all kinds of different part holes and where they begin and end, but the whole process itself really is ongoing as how we make our way through whatever we're presented with. And we can bracket and study that in many different levels. We want to look at how the body develops or how certain kind of personality or whatever. And that's what I meant by the bracketing. But I don't think you can actually separate what we call feeling and emotion. I think of it as completely bodily, sensory. I think of cognition that way too. Brain is so important. I studied the brain for a reason. But how to hold these things without choosing one or the other, or just saying we're only going to talk about cognition and it has nothing to do with emotion and feeling. These kind of conversations I find aren't helpful. And so I do say things, I try to bring it in. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate your Taoist leanings, because there is a logic, a both and logic that's hidden in here that we oftentimes mistake for the either or logic that we need to operate here and now in time. So yeah, anyway, it's great to know you're on the planet, and thank you for
Same to
sharing
you
today.
I would love to go deeper on this, on a lot of these issues, because they're important. But also to that both and, I even trying to find a way for it to be both and either or at the same time, kind of, I really feel like a lot of us are trying to push into a new way of really being able to kind of move around with multiplicities in a sense. And it's very hard, but I think a lot of people are doing that in a lot of different levels. And I guess the other, I'm not sure I addressed all your questions, but the care part for me is that kind of primordial activity, that is already holding all that paradox stuff. And I did choose the waymaking to link it to the Eastern traditions in a way, but also the making because that links it more to this more
Creativity piece
difficult.
of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So and Ames and Hall, I don't know if you read the Tao as translated by Ames and Hall, but they actually use waymaking instead of way for their translation. So, but there's all kind of stuff in there that. But I think emotion and feeling are just so important and so bodily at the most basic level when you ask what is a body.
Exactly. Just the idea of intrinsic urge is a state of excitement. And that kind of excitement goes all the way down to an atom that's excited by a photon. And so we don't need to worry too much about anthropomorphizing, but we do need to worry too much about laundering the sacred feminine from and the centrality of subjective experience and anything that concerns value from our science. And we need to fix that.
Yeah, I think that's another point I was thinking of when you were asking is value is also tied into this. I mean, one
Totally.
thing you
It's
can't get away. I mean, that's another thing. I understand we bracket epistemology, ontology, ethics, but
axiology is all about value, and it's
axiology,
completely
exactly.
missing from science.
But it's because it gets bracketed and then you think it's something else. But that's what I was trying to say. Like all of this are different ways of coming at this process we're trying to understand. They're not actually separable, even if we have to separate them to get our grip on it. And it's wonderful you brought up the feminine side of care because there's a whole, I brought it up maybe in one slide, but that's one reason I like that word is because there's a whole tradition of on all these different where if you want to look at value theory, you want to look at feminism, you want to look at even bro culture, I mean like, whatever, right? You can find people talking about this. And so it doesn't put everything on the same track because like, there's different voices get heard more and all that. But it's at least like a way to open the conversation and start to go, hey, there's another perspective on this that actually fits with this one that you might have thought was opposite. So thanks for bringing that up too, because, and honestly, it is hard. I mean, I didn't say it's because I'm a woman or something that I don't talk about care, but it's it's more likely that it gets kind of considered in a certain way, and that's fine too. I embrace all of the femininity and care and love and all of that, but I also feel like there's so much richness to open this word up through tension, through tension. So
That's beautiful.
but thanks so much for your comments and for being here. And don't worry that you were late. I'm just glad you're here.
Thanks.
Totally. Totally. Guys, that was amazing. I'm so glad I made the call to not ask my questions and just absorb your interaction with all these people.
You have
This
no
is really
question, Charlie.
I do, but
Another
you know,
time.
yeah, they'll take a long time and they're, yeah, they're not as interesting as the things that just came up in this 16 way conversation by any means. So a couple of things. I mean, we only have a couple minutes, so I'm not going to go into anything complicated, but I did want to say so so many good references in your talk and also in the conversation we've had. So one thing I don't usually do that I want to do this time is if you don't mind, send out your slides later. Share your slides with people, and then I'm gonna try to share the transcript and the chat transcript too, because there was
That
this
would be
whole
awesome. Yeah. I
yeah,
was
there
going to
was this
ask if
whole
you could do that.
there was like a really cool side conversation that happened, um, several of them that happened in the chat that I know I can't pay attention to the chat very well while people are talking, but
Yeah, I think I
um,
missed it because the spores thing, I have no idea. I need to go back and, but if you're going to send it, I'll wait and read it. Also,
yeah,
there were a few, just everyone, if anyone can put anything in the chat or send it to you, like, that I could better understand the perspective. I think also Henry's work and, yeah, anyone who I feel like I'm kind of not fully, getting, please send me whatever you think I'm missing. Is my thing. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And guys, do y'all have her email? We maybe should type that into the chat too, so be sure. But anyway, yeah, what a great what a great conversation. I knew it would be really rich and good. And I'm such a simplifier. I'm such a like lumper rather than a splitter. Um, that I decided not to, say very much and just let everyone do that as much as possible. So anyway,
Well, you have
thank
to
you
tell me
guys so
later about
much.
your bidimensional stuff that you brought up in one of the emails, but that would be too much right now. But
Yeah.
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 But also
Yeah.
just thanks, Charlie, for doing this. I mean, it's so cool that you get all these people together and have these conversations, like wow, like thank you.
It's so much fun. So, yeah. Thank you. And thanks everybody. And we'll see you guys soon. I'm going to send out another link soon to Marco Cavaglia's our guest at the next one, and it's happening soon. It's going to be March 4th. So, see you guys soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.